Little girl sobbed, begging, "Don't hurt us." What the millionaire lonely learned next broke his heart. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin. It was an unusually cold evening in New York City. The kind of cold that makes the city feel even more isolating, even in the heart of bustling streets. Caleb Whitmore, the millionaire CEO of a tech empire, walked through the empty sidewalk, his footsteps echoing through the silence of the snowy evening. He had just left a meeting that felt as meaningless as every other he'd had that year. Christmas lights twinkled in the distance, but they only reminded him of how alone he was. No calls from friends, no messages from family, just the constant pressure of his business. As he walked past the glowing windows of luxury shops, the warmth of the city felt distant, something he could never quite reach. He glanced at his phone, seeing another generic holiday message from a business associate. "Merry Christmas," it read. And for a moment, he thought about how many people sent these messages out of obligation, not affection. He sighed and slipped the phone back into his coat pocket. The cold wind whipped through his overcoat, but the chill he felt inside was far deeper. He continued his walk, lost in his thoughts, unaware that he was about to encounter something that would change his life forever. As he turned a corner, something caught his attention. There, just beneath the dim glow of a street lamp, was a small figure sitting on the cold concrete. At first, he thought it was just another person waiting for a ride, or perhaps a homeless person seeking shelter. But as he drew closer, he saw her a little girl, no older than 7, curled up in a tattered coat, shivering violently. She was holding something in her arms, but it wasn't clear what it was at first. As he stepped closer, she looked up, her eyes wide with fear, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She was trembling, her body shaking with cold, but it was the desperation in her eyes that made Caleb stop in his tracks. She whispered, barely audible over the wind, "Please, don't hurt us." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Caleb's breath caught in his throat as he knelt down beside her, his heart pounding in his chest. She was so small, so fragile, and her fear was palpable. What had happened to her? Who had hurt her? And why was she alone? The girl looked up at him with a mixture of fear and hope, as if she wasn't sure whether he was there to help or hurt her. Her small, trembling voice broke through the silence again. "Please, don't let them take her." Caleb didn't know what to think, but the sight of her clutching something tightly in her arms made his heart ache. He looked down at the bundle in her hands and saw a small baby, barely a few months old, wrapped in a dirty blanket. The baby was crying weakly, its tiny face pale and covered in grime. Caleb's mind raced. What kind of life had this child known? What had she gone through? Without thinking, he gently scooped the girl and her baby sister into his arms, ignoring the cold seeping into his suit. His entire being screamed to protect them, to keep them safe. He knew he couldn't just leave them there, alone in the snow, with no one to care for them. "I've got you," he whispered, though his voice cracked. The moment he held her, a flood of emotions he didn't understand rushed over him. He felt a connection to her, as though he had known her his whole life. The loneliness he had felt for so long seemed to melt away, replaced by a strange warmth. But that warmth was mixed with the fear of what might happen next. Who had abandoned these children? Why were they in such a desperate state? As he carried them to his car, his mind raced with questions, but he pushed them aside. He couldn't think about the why right now. He just had to get them to safety. But as he drove them to the hospital, a question lingered in the back of his mind, one that would haunt him long after this night. What had broken her, and how could he help fix it? The hospital was sterile, with its bright fluorescent lights and the distant beeping of machines that seemed to blend into the background. Caleb Whitmore sat in a cold, hard plastic chair next to the small bed where the little girl rested. Her small, fragile form was covered with a hospital blanket, her tiny hands still clutching the edges as if afraid someone might take her away. The baby, Luna, had been taken to another room, but Caleb couldn't help but feel a deep concern for both of them. The moments before they had arrived here still echoed in his mind. Her trembling voice, pleading for him not to hurt them, haunted him. Who had hurt these innocent children? The nurse had told him that the baby was stable now, but Caleb still couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. The girl, whose name was Emily, had been too scared to speak much at first, but when she finally did, it was a whisper that cut through Caleb's heart. They hurt her. They left us. Caleb looked down at her, his heart swelling with sympathy. He had spent years in the business world, building a fortune and a name for himself. But nothing had prepared him for the overwhelming sense of responsibility he felt for this little girl. His eyes wandered to the window, where the snow still fell, the city's lights casting a soft glow over the night. He had been walking alone, as he always did. His life had been nothing but a series of meetings, deals, and empty interactions. He had everything, yet nothing. Now, as he sat beside this child, he realized just how empty his life had been before. The silence in the room was broken by the soft rustle of Emily shifting in the bed. Her eyes fluttered open, and Caleb leaned forward, unsure of what to say. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, though the fear in her eyes hadn't fully disappeared. "They left us. Mommy, she's really sick." The words hung in the air, heavy with pain and sorrow. Caleb didn't know how to respond. He wasn't a father, and he wasn't prepared for the responsibility that had suddenly fallen into his lap. But in that moment, he knew that he couldn't walk away from her, not after seeing the pain in her eyes, not after hearing her plea for help. He reached out, his hand resting gently on hers, offering what little comfort he could. "I'm here for you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Emily looked up at him, and for the first time since he had met her, a faint flicker of trust seemed to form in her gaze. She didn't say anything, but Caleb could see it in her eyes. She was holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone cared. The nurse came in to check on her, and Caleb stepped back, allowing her the space she needed. As the nurse took the girl's vitals, Caleb found himself lost in thought. Emily's words kept replaying in his mind. "Mommy is really sick." He had seen children in worse conditions before, children who had suffered from neglect or abandonment. But there was something about Emily's situation that struck him deeper than anything he had encountered. He couldn't help but feel that this wasn't just another case of a child in need. It was a cry for help from someone who had no one left. Caleb stood up, walking over to the window and gazing out at the snow-covered city. He had spent his life building walls around himself. Walls that kept people at a distance. Walls that protected him from the world. But as he watched the snow fall, he realized that his walls had been nothing more than a prison. He had isolated himself for so long, pushing away any chance at connection, any opportunity for love or compassion. But now, sitting in that sterile hospital room, those walls were beginning to crumble. He didn't know what the future held for Emily, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't just walk away from her. Not now. Not after seeing the pain and fear in her eyes. He turned back to her, a sense of determination building within him. "You're not alone," he promised, though he wasn't sure exactly what he meant by it yet. As he watched Emily slowly drift back to sleep, he knew that his life had changed forever. No longer would he be the man who walked past those in need. No longer would he be the man who kept his heart locked away. For the first time in years, Caleb Whitmore felt a sense of purpose, and it was because of a little girl who had begged him not to hurt her. The next few days passed in a blur for Caleb. He spent most of his time at the hospital, sitting by Emily's side, watching over her as she slowly regained her strength. The doctors assured him that both Emily and her baby sister Luna were stable now, but there was a quiet sadness in their eyes. A sadness Caleb knew they didn't just get from physical wounds. They had experienced something far deeper, something that left scars no one could see. Emily hadn't spoken much since that night. She would sometimes whisper something to Caleb, but it was always brief, as if she was afraid to say too much. One evening, as he sat by her bed, she finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with a kind of vulnerability he hadn't seen before. "Why are you helping us?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Caleb was taken aback. The question caught him off guard, but it was one he had been asking himself since the moment he picked her up off the cold pavement. Why had he stopped? Why hadn't he just walked away? "Because," he began, but his words faltered. There was no easy answer. He had no idea why he had made the choice to help her, but deep down, he knew it was because he couldn't leave her like that. "Because no one should be alone like you were," he finally said, his voice soft but firm. Emily stared at him for a moment, as if trying to understand what he meant. Then she nodded slowly, as if she understood, even though she didn't have the words to express it. It was then that Caleb realized just how much this little girl had already started to change him. He had always lived in his own world, a world where success was measured by numbers and deals, by how much you had, not how much you gave. But now, sitting beside Emily, he felt like he was waking up from a long, numb sleep. For the first time in years, he felt something real, something that had been missing from his life. The next day, Caleb went to see Luna. The baby had been in the neonatal unit, but the doctors said she was doing better now. He was anxious to see her, to make sure she was okay. But when he walked into the room, he was taken aback. Luna was awake, her small eyes wide, taking in everything around her. As soon as she saw Caleb, she reached out her tiny hand, and for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. Caleb walked over to the crib and gently lifted her out, cradling her in his arms. He was surprised at how light she was, how fragile, and how deeply protective he felt of her in that moment. It was a feeling he had never known before, but it was one that came naturally. As he held Luna, he thought about the kind of life they must have had before. The fear that Emily had shown, the way she clung to her baby sister, it all pointed to a past filled with pain and neglect. Caleb knew that they had been through something unimaginable, but he also knew that they didn't have to face it alone anymore. He would make sure of that. Later that evening, when he was alone in his office, Caleb sat at his desk, staring out the window at the city below. The world outside seemed so far away, so different from the world he had known. The loneliness that had once consumed him now felt like a distant memory. He couldn't shake the thought of Emily and Luna, of their vulnerability and strength. They had changed him, in ways he didn't fully understand yet, but he knew he couldn't go back to the way things were. He had to do something more than just helping them in the moment. He had to be the person who made sure they had a future, a chance at something better. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. He had to bring them into his life, into his world, and make sure they were safe, that they were loved. As the weeks went by, Caleb's connection with Emily and Luna grew stronger. He visited them every day, taking them to his home when they were well enough to leave the hospital. He hired a team to help care for them, but he was always there, always present, always the one who made sure they had everything they needed. But as much as he tried to give them the best life he could offer, there was still something he needed to understand the truth about their past, about what had really happened to them. Emily had been silent about it for so long, but Caleb wasn't going to push her. He knew that when she was ready, she would tell him. And when that day came, Caleb would be ready. He wasn't going anywhere. He had made a promise to this little girl, to both of them, that he would always be there. And for the first time in his life, he knew that he would keep that promise. The days that followed were filled with routine, but it was a new kind of routine for Caleb. He had spent his life managing businesses, making deals, and keeping his emotions locked away in a box. But now, with Emily and Luna, he found himself learning something new, what it meant to care for someone, what it meant to be needed. Emily had started to trust him a little more each day. She still didn't speak much, but her eyes softened when she looked at him. And that, in itself, was progress. It was clear to Caleb that she had been through something unimaginable, something that made it hard for her to open up. Still, he didn't press her. He knew that, in time, she would share her story when she was ready. As for Luna, the baby was thriving in his care. Caleb would sometimes hold her, feeling the warmth of her small body against his chest, and he would be filled with a deep sense of protectiveness. His life had changed so much since that night, and with every passing day, he felt more connected to these two little girls, more willing to do whatever it took to ensure they were safe and loved. One afternoon, as Caleb sat in his office, going through the endless paperwork that was part of his daily life, his assistant, Claire, knocked on the door. "Mr. Whitmore, there's someone here to see you," she said, her voice hesitant. Caleb raised an eyebrow. He wasn't expecting anyone. "Who is it?" he asked, though he had a pretty good guess. "It's a woman," Claire said. "She says she's Emily's mother." Caleb felt a cold chill run down his spine. Emily had mentioned her mother before, though not in much detail. He had never heard her speak of her father. Caleb's mind raced. What did this mean? Was this the moment he had been dreading? The moment Emily's mother came to take her away? Or was it something else? He stood up, his chair creaking under the weight of his thoughts, and walked to the door. When he opened it, a woman in her late 20s stood there, her eyes tired, her clothes simple but clean. Her face was familiar, but there was no mistaking the desperation in her eyes. She looked like she had been through hell. "Are you, Mr. Whitmore?" she asked, her voice shaky. Caleb nodded. "Yes, I am," he said cautiously. "And you are?" She hesitated before speaking. "I'm Emily's mother. My name is Rachel." The name hit Caleb like a punch to the gut. Rachel. It was a name he hadn't expected, but one that felt strangely familiar. Something about her reminded him of Emily. The way her eyes seemed so similar. The way her voice trembled. Rachel stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "I need to talk to you about my daughter. I know I haven't been there for her, but I need her back. She's my daughter." Caleb stood there for a moment, uncertain. He knew what he had to do. He had made a promise to Emily. A promise that he would always be there for her. But now, faced with her mother, he didn't know what to feel. Was this woman truly capable of taking care of Emily and Luna? Or had she abandoned them in the past? Caleb's mind was filled with questions, but he couldn't ignore the look in Rachel's eyes. She was clearly desperate. "I understand," Caleb said slowly, his voice steady, but firm. "But Emily has been through a lot. I'm not sure you understand just how much she's been through. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. I know. I know I've made mistakes. But I can't lose her again. I can't lose my little girl. Caleb looked at her, seeing the pain in her face, but also the uncertainty. He wasn't sure if he could trust her, but he knew he had to give her a chance. I'll let you see her, Caleb said, his voice softer now. But you need to understand something. Emily and Luna are safe here. They're with me now, and I won't let anyone hurt them again, not even you. Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. I just want to be a mother again, she whispered. Caleb stepped aside, allowing Rachel to enter the office. He couldn't help but feel a sense of dread in the pit of his stomach. What would this mean for Emily and Luna? He didn't know, but he knew one thing for sure. His life, their lives, were never going to be the same again. Days passed, and Caleb found himself struggling with the weight of his decision. Rachel had visited Emily and Luna a few more times, and though her presence was a reminder of the pain they had suffered, Caleb couldn't help but notice a change in her. She had a new sense of determination, a promise in her eyes that she was going to be a better mother, that she would do whatever it took to rebuild the family she had once torn apart. Emily was hesitant at first, her trust still fragile, but over time, she began to warm to the idea of having her mother back in her life. It wasn't an easy process, and the journey was far from over. But for the first time, Caleb saw hope in Emily's eyes. It was a small shift, but it was there. Caleb watched all of this unfold from the sidelines, unsure of his place in it. He had promised Emily that he would always be there for her. But now that her mother was back, he wasn't sure what his role would be. Would he be the protector? The one who had saved her from a life of fear and neglect? Or would he fade into the background? The man who had tried to give her a chance at something better, but who now had to step aside. It was a question that weighed heavily on his mind. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't just walk away. He had made a promise to Emily, and that promise meant something. It meant that he would always be there for her, no matter what. One evening, after Rachel had left, Caleb sat with Emily in the living room of his home, the two of them sharing a quiet moment together. He had spent so much time focusing on her needs, on trying to make her feel safe, that he hadn't fully stopped to consider what she needed most, what she wanted. Emily, he began softly, his voice filled with a tenderness he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. How are you feeling about everything? About your mom? About being here with me? Emily looked up at him, her small face serious but open. She thought for a moment, then spoke in her soft, careful way. It's okay, she said. I'm happy to be here with you and Luna. But sometimes, I still miss her. Caleb's heart clenched at her words. He could see the confusion in her eyes, the desire to be with her mother, but also the fear of what that might mean. It was a struggle he couldn't fully understand, but he knew it was real. I understand, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. It's okay to miss her, Emily. And it's okay to be confused. You don't have to have all the answers right now. What's important is that you're safe, and you're loved. And I'm here for you, no matter what. Emily nodded, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't say anything more, but Caleb could see the weight of her emotions in her gaze. He knew she had been through too much in her short life, and the road to healing would be long. But he also knew that they were on that road together. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb felt something that had eluded him for years. Hope. The next few days were filled with small victories. Emily and Rachel were spending more time together. And though it wasn't perfect, Caleb could see the bond between them, slowly starting to rebuild. Emily's laughter had returned, though it was quiet at times, and Luna's smiles grew more frequent as she became more comfortable with the new changes. Caleb had learned that healing wasn't always a linear process. There were good days and bad days. Days when Emily's trust felt like it was slipping away, and days when it felt like it was growing stronger. And through it all, Caleb stood by, quietly supporting, never pushing, but always there. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sunset, Caleb reflected on everything that had happened in the past few months. His life had been turned upside down, but in the best possible way. He had discovered a love and a purpose that had been missing from his life, and it had come in the form of two little girls who needed him. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb made a vow to himself. No matter what the future held, he would never abandon them. They were his family now, and he would do everything in his power to make sure they had the love and safety they deserved. The weeks passed, and Caleb found himself becoming more and more involved in Emily and Luna's lives. Rachel was doing her best to be a good mother, but there were moments when Caleb could see the hesitation in her actions. It was clear that her past mistakes weighed heavily on her, but she was trying for the sake of her daughters, trying to prove that she could change. Emily had started to open up more, though her words were often fragmented and cautious. She would talk about the things she remembered, about the days before they came to Caleb, the cold nights, and the hunger they had experienced. Caleb listened, never interrupting, always there to reassure her that it wasn't her fault. One evening, as Caleb sat with Emily in the living room, a rare, quiet moment between the two of them, she spoke. "Do you think my mom will stay?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with uncertainty. Caleb paused for a moment, thinking about how to answer. He knew the journey was far from over, and he wasn't sure what the future held. "I think your mom is trying," he said gently. "She's trying to be there for you, to be a better mom. It's not going to be easy, but she's trying." Emily looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "I don't want to get hurt again," she whispered, her voice breaking. Caleb's heart ached for her. He knew the scars she carried weren't just physical, they were emotional. Deep wounds that could only begin to heal with time. "I understand," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "And I promise you, no one will hurt you again. Not while I'm here." It wasn't much, but it was the truth. Caleb didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew that he would be there for Emily, for Luna, and for Rachel, no matter what. The days grew warmer, and with the change in the weather came a change in the atmosphere in Caleb's home. Emily and Rachel were spending more time together, and though there were still moments of tension, Caleb could see the bond between them growing. There were more smiles, more laughter, and even the occasional moment of quiet contentment. But it wasn't perfect. There were days when Emily would retreat into herself, when she would cling to Caleb for comfort, and Rachel would struggle to find her place in the family. Caleb knew this wasn't going to be an easy road, but he also knew it was one worth traveling. One day, as Caleb was in his office, going through the usual pile of paperwork, he received a call from Rachel. "Caleb," she said, her voice shaky, "I need to talk to you." Caleb sat up, concerned by the tone in her voice. "What's wrong?" he asked, his mind racing. "It's about Emily," Rachel said, her voice trembling. She's been asking about her father. She wants to know where he is." Caleb's heart sank. Emily had never mentioned her father before, and now, hearing that she was asking questions, made him realize that there were still so many unanswered questions in her mind. He had always been careful not to bring up the past, not to force Emily to confront things she wasn't ready for. But now, it seemed like the past was coming to the surface on its own. "What do you think she needs, Rachel?" Caleb asked, his voice calm but serious. "I think she needs the truth," Rachel said quietly, "but I'm not sure if she's ready to hear it. I don't want to hurt her more." but I can't keep this from her forever. Caleb took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. He had always known that Emily's past would eventually catch up with her, that the truth about her family would have to come out. But he wasn't prepared for it to happen like this. "We'll figure it out together," Caleb said, his voice firm. "We'll tell her when she's ready, and we'll be there for her, no matter how hard it is." That evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Caleb could feel the tension in the air. Emily was quiet, picking at her food, and Rachel seemed distant, lost in her thoughts. Caleb knew this was the moment. It was time to talk. "Emily," he began softly, looking at her across the table. "Your mom and I have been talking, and we think it's time to tell you something important. Something about your dad." Emily looked up at him, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "My dad?" she whispered. Rachel's voice trembled as she spoke. "Emily, your dad. He's not in the picture anymore. He wasn't a good person, and he hurt your mom and me. That's why we had to leave." Caleb's heart broke as he watched Emily's face shift from confusion to sadness. She didn't speak for a long time, but the pain in her eyes was evident. Caleb reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I'm so sorry you had to go through all of that, Emily," he said softly. "But you're safe now. You're with people who care about you, and we're going to help you heal." Emily nodded slowly, her small hand gripping his tightly. It wasn't a perfect answer, and it wasn't an easy conversation, but it was the first step in the healing process. Caleb knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but for the first time, he believed that Emily and Luna had a chance at a better future, and as long as he was there, they would never have to face it alone. Days turned into weeks, and Caleb found himself slowly but surely falling into a new routine. Life with Emily and Luna had become more than just a temporary arrangement. It felt like home. The healing process for both girls was far from complete, but there was a noticeable shift in the air, something lighter. Emily, though still carrying the weight of her past, had begun to smile more. Luna, always the quiet observer, was starting to laugh more freely, her giggles filling the rooms of Caleb's home. Caleb watched as they slowly but steadily began to rebuild their lives, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was a part of something meaningful. Yet, there were still moments of doubt. Despite the progress, Emily's questions about her father lingered in Caleb's mind. She had asked more than once, and each time, Rachel had avoided answering. Caleb understood the delicate nature of the situation, but the silence was becoming harder to ignore. One afternoon, as he sat in the living room reading a report, Emily came to sit next to him. She was holding a worn-out piece of paper in her hands, her fingers nervously tracing the edges. "Caleb," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to know more about him." Caleb looked at her, his heart sinking. The question had been coming. He knew it. He put down the report, his gaze steady as he met her eyes. "You mean your dad?" he asked gently. Emily nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. Caleb took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Emily," he began, "I don't know everything about your father. What I do know is that he wasn't a good man. He hurt your mom, and that's why she left him." Emily's gaze dropped to the paper in her hands, her expression unreadable. "I don't understand," she said softly. "If he hurt you, why do I still want to know about him?" Caleb's heart ached at the question. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing: Emily was trying to make sense of a broken past, and that was part of healing. "It's okay to want to know," Caleb said quietly, "but it's important to remember that his actions don't define who you are. You are not what he did. You are so much more than that." Emily looked up at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to find the truth in his words. Caleb reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. I know you're confused, and that's okay. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel, and you don't have to do it alone. We're here, and we'll help you through this. For a long moment, Emily didn't say anything. She just stared at the paper in her hands, lost in thought. Finally, she tucked the paper into her lap and looked at Caleb, her voice small but steady. I want to be okay, she said quietly. Caleb's heart swelled with emotion as he looked at the young girl who had endured so much. And yet still, she had hope. You are okay, Emily, he said softly. And you're going to be even better. It's going to take time, but we're all in this together. The following days were a mixture of progress and setbacks. Emily began attending therapy sessions, something Rachel had insisted on, and Caleb supported her every step of the way. Sometimes, Emily would come home from therapy and sit in silence, lost in her thoughts. Other times, she would open up, sharing pieces of her past that she had kept buried for so long. There were days when the weight of it all felt too much for her, and Caleb found himself struggling to find the right words to comfort her. But he kept showing up, sitting beside her, and offering a steady presence. Luna, in the meantime, continued to flourish. Her laughter filled the house, and her small hands were always busy drawing pictures or playing with the toys Caleb had brought home for her. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short time, but Caleb knew that their journey was far from over. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, the topic of the future came up. Rachel, who had been quiet for most of the evening, spoke up. Caleb, she began, her voice tentative. I know things have been hard, and I'm still trying to figure things out. But I want to make sure Emily and Luna have the best life possible. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to be the mother they deserve. Caleb looked at her, the sincerity in her eyes unmistakable. He could see that she was trying, that she was determined to make things right. But he also knew that the road ahead would not be easy. I think you're on the right path, Caleb said, his voice calm but firm. But remember, it's not just about trying, it's about consistency. You have to prove it every day, not just with words, but with actions. Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. I know, she said quietly. And I will. I'll keep trying, Caleb. I promise. Caleb looked at her, then at Emily and Luna, who were both quietly eating their dinner. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, in a long time, he felt hopeful. The road ahead would be difficult, but they were a family now, and they were in it together. And that, he knew, was the most important thing. Weeks passed, and the world outside continued on. But Caleb's life had been irrevocably changed. The bond between him, Emily, Luna, and Rachel had grown stronger with every passing day. And though there were still challenges, there was something different in the air now: hope. But even as Emily and Rachel worked through their past and made efforts to heal, Caleb found himself facing a new obstacle. The echoes of Emily's past were still haunting her, and some nights she would wake up in tears, drenched in sweat, clutching the sheets as if they were the only thing keeping her grounded. Caleb would sit by her, rubbing her back until she fell asleep again, his heart aching for her pain. It wasn't easy, and there were days when Emily seemed lost in her own mind, the weight of everything too much for her to bear. On those days, Caleb knew what he had to do: be there. But there were still days when the silence between them felt deafening. Emily had stopped asking about her father for a while, and Caleb thought, perhaps naively, that the silence meant she had come to terms with it. He was wrong. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Rachel brought up the topic again. Caleb, she said, her voice softer than usual. Emily has been asking about her father again. She wants to know more. Caleb's stomach tightened. The truth about Emily's father was complicated. He had been a part of her life, but a dark one. And Caleb knew that telling her about him would not be easy. Not for Emily, and certainly not for Rachel. What should we tell her? Rachel asked, looking at Caleb with uncertainty in her eyes. He took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. He knew this moment would come eventually, but he hadn't been prepared for it now. We have to be honest with her, Caleb said, his voice steady. But we also have to be careful. She's not ready to know everything, but she deserves to understand the truth in a way that she can handle it. Emily had been listening quietly, and when Caleb spoke, her eyes locked on his, searching for something reassurance, perhaps, or the answer to the many questions she had yet to ask. Caleb met her gaze and smiled gently. Emily, he began, I know you've been asking about your father, and I think it's time we talk about it. But I want you to know that this is not your fault. What happened with him, it's not your fault. You are loved, and you are safe now. Emily didn't respond immediately. She just sat there, her small hands twisting together in her lap. Caleb could see the hesitation in her eyes, the fear of what she might hear, but he also saw the determination. She wanted to know the truth. Your father, Caleb began slowly. He wasn't a good man. He hurt your mom, and because of that, she had to leave him. You and your mom were both very hurt by him, and that's why we're here now. Emily didn't say anything for a long time, but Caleb could see her thinking, processing. Her brow furrowed as she took in the information, trying to make sense of the fragments of her past. Is that why he's not here? She asked quietly. Caleb nodded. Yes, that's part of it. The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Emily looked down at her lap, her fingers still tightly woven together. Caleb could feel the weight of the moment. You don't have to forgive him, Emily, he said gently. You don't owe him anything. What matters now is that you're here, with people who care about you, and we will do everything we can to make sure you feel safe, loved, and protected. Emily's lip trembled, and Caleb could see the tears welling up in her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, but Caleb knew that her heart was heavy. The past was still a shadow in her life, and it wasn't going to disappear overnight. But what mattered was that she wasn't facing it alone anymore. Rachel, too, sat in silence, watching Emily, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and sadness. I'm so sorry, Emily, she whispered. I'm so sorry for everything. Emily didn't respond, but Caleb could see her slowly, almost imperceptibly, leaning toward her mother. Rachel reached out, hesitating for a moment, and then gently placed her hand on Emily's. I know I can never make up for what happened, Rachel said, her voice breaking, but I will always be here for you, and I'll do everything I can to make it right. Emily didn't speak, but she didn't pull away either. Caleb watched the two of them, the quiet exchange between mother and daughter. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And that was enough for now. Later that night, as Caleb lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he reflected on the conversation. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that Emily's journey wasn't over, and that there would be more moments like this, moments when the past would rear its ugly head, and they would have to face it together. But Caleb also knew one thing with certainty. No matter what came next, they would face it together. They had built a family, and that meant everything. The weeks passed, and the emotional toll of the past months began to settle in for everyone. Caleb had grown even closer to Emily and Luna, his feelings for them deepening in ways he never expected. Emily, despite her wounds, had started showing more of her true self, the vibrant, curious girl she had always been before the world had scarred her. It wasn't easy, though. There were still nights when she woke up crying, calling for her mom, or even calling for someone she didn't quite know yet, a father figure who hadn't been there for her. Caleb would sit by her, holding her hand and whispering words of reassurance, trying to fill that void she had been left with. But despite the moments of darkness, there were also days of light, small victories that made Caleb feel like they were moving in the right direction. He watched Emily slowly regain the confidence to join activities at school, to smile without hesitation, and to laugh with her sister, Luna. Luna, too, had found her voice and her joy. She was no longer just the quiet observer. Her laughter now filled their home, bringing life and light to every corner. Rachel had come a long way as well. The guilt she carried for her past actions was still present, but it no longer consumed her. She had taken on more responsibilities as a mother, determined to be the best she could be for Emily and Luna. There were days when she felt like she was failing, like she wasn't doing enough. But Caleb could see the effort she was putting in. Rachel was trying, and sometimes that was enough. Caleb continued to support her, but he also knew that the real work had to come from within her. One day, after school, Emily came to Caleb with a question that had been lingering in her mind for a while. "Caleb," she asked hesitantly, "do you think I'll ever be like I was before?" Caleb looked at her, his heart breaking for the little girl who had endured so much. She had grown so much in such a short time, but the scars of her past were still there, quietly shaping her. He sat down beside her and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're already stronger than you know," he said, his voice steady but filled with warmth. "You've been through a lot, Emily, and healing takes time. But every day, you're becoming more and more of the person you were always meant to be. And you're not alone in that. You have your family here, and we're going to support you every step of the way." Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. She nodded slowly, as if trying to convince herself that she could one day truly be whole again. Caleb smiled at her, then looked out the window. The day was beginning to fade, and the sun cast a soft golden glow over everything. He knew that there would be more tough days ahead, days when the past would creep back into their lives and threaten to undo the progress they had made. But he also knew that as long as they had each other, they would keep moving forward. In the weeks that followed, Caleb's life continued to change in ways he couldn't have imagined. His days were no longer filled with just business meetings and deal-making. They were filled with laughter, tears, and moments of profound connection. Emily and Luna had become his family, and he had come to realize just how much he needed them in his life. Rachel, too, had become a more integral part of the family. She was still figuring out how to balance her past with her present, but she was making strides. Caleb could see the love she had for her daughters and the deep regret for the mistakes she had made. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Caleb realized how far they had come. Emily, who had once been so closed off and afraid, was now sitting comfortably on the couch, her head resting on Rachel's shoulder. Luna was playing with her toys on the floor, her laughter echoing through the room. Caleb looked at the two of them, Emily and Rachel, and felt a sense of peace settle over him. They had found a way to rebuild their lives, to heal the wounds that had once seemed so impossible to overcome. And it was in that moment, as he watched them, that he realized something he had never fully understood until now. Family wasn't just about blood. It was about love, support, and the willingness to fight for one another. They weren't perfect. There were still struggles ahead. But they had come so far, and Caleb knew they would face whatever came next as a family. As the evening went on, Caleb found himself lost in thought. He had come into this situation with no clear plan, no idea what the future would hold. But now, looking at the family he had helped create, he realized that this was exactly where he was meant to be. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. He smiled softly to himself, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. It had been several months since that pivotal moment when Caleb had made the decision to stay by Emily and Luna's side, and the changes in their lives were becoming more and more evident. They had all grown together, healed together, and in many ways, had learned from each other. Caleb found himself deeply entrenched in the lives of the two girls and Rachel, their struggles and victories becoming his own. Every day brought a new challenge, a new lesson, but also moments of joy that made everything worthwhile. One afternoon, Emily came to Caleb, her face set with determination. She had been quiet for the last few days, lost in her thoughts. But today, something was different. "Caleb," she said, her voice steady but filled with an emotion Caleb couldn't quite place. "I think I'm ready to talk about him. About my dad." Caleb felt his heart tighten. He had known this day would come, but hearing her say it out loud still hit him hard. Emily had been through so much already, and Caleb knew that hearing more about her father, about the man who had hurt them all, wasn't going to be easy for her. But this was a breakthrough. A moment where Emily was beginning to take control of her story, and Caleb was ready to support her through it. "Are you sure, Emily?" Caleb asked softly, his voice filled with care. "We can wait. You don't have to do this until you're ready." Emily nodded, her eyes focused on the ground for a moment before looking up at Caleb with a small, uncertain smile. "I think I need to," she said quietly. "I want to understand. I want to know why he wasn't a good dad. Why he wasn't there for me and Luna." Caleb took a deep breath, steadying himself. He knew this conversation wasn't going to be easy, but he also knew it was a necessary part of Emily's healing. He sat down beside her, offering her a reassuring smile. "You're so strong, Emily," he said, "and I'll be right here with you, every step of the way." Emily gave a slight nod, and Caleb began to share what he knew carefully, thoughtfully, choosing his words with caution. "Your dad. He wasn't the man your mom thought he was when they first met," Caleb started, his voice steady but filled with a deep sadness. "He made promises he couldn't keep. He hurt your mom, and he hurt you and Luna. That's why she had to leave him." Emily's face remained expressionless as she listened. Caleb could see that she was taking in every word, trying to make sense of the information that had been hidden from her for so long. "He never really showed love," Caleb continued. "He was angry. And when things didn't go his way, he took it out on those who loved him the most." Caleb paused, his heart heavy. This was the part of the story Emily needed to hear, the part about why he was not in her life, why she and Luna were now safe. "Your mom left him because she knew she couldn't stay in that environment. She couldn't let you and Luna grow up around that kind of anger." Emily looked down at her hands, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her shirt. Caleb stayed silent, giving her time to process. He knew this was a lot to take in, but it was important that she understood. "I'm so sorry, Emily," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "No child should ever have to experience that." After a long silence, Emily finally spoke, her voice small but filled with clarity. "I don't want to remember him like that," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I want to remember the good things, the good times, but I don't think I can. Not anymore." Caleb nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He pulled her into a gentle hug, feeling the tension in her shoulders slowly ease as she leaned into him. "You don't have to remember him at all, Emily," he said softly. "What matters now is that you are safe, that you are loved, and that you are stronger than you realize." Emily didn't respond, but Caleb could feel the shift in her, the burden lifting slightly as she allowed herself to let go of the past. It wasn't gone, not yet. but it was beginning to lose its power over her. Over the next few weeks, things continued to improve. Emily's relationship with Rachel, though still complicated, was gradually healing. They had their moments of tension, but there were also moments of connection, small victories that spoke volumes about the progress they were making together. Caleb watched this unfold, feeling both proud and grateful to be a part of their journey. One evening, as the family sat together, Emily turned to Caleb with a soft, tentative smile. "Caleb," she began, her voice shy, but full of sincerity. "I don't know if I'll ever be completely okay, but I think I'm getting there. And I just want to thank you for being here, for everything." Caleb's heart swelled as he looked at her. "You don't have to thank me, Emily," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "I'm just glad I could be here for you. I always will be." And in that moment, as Emily looked at him with a newfound sense of peace in her eyes, Caleb knew they were on the right path. It wouldn't be an easy road, and there would still be struggles, but together, they could face anything. They were a family now, and that bond was unbreakable. The days had begun to blur together for Caleb. He had settled into a life he never could have imagined just a few months ago. Each morning, the sound of laughter from Emily and Luna was the first thing he heard. And every evening, the warmth of their presence filled his home. It wasn't perfect, there were still struggles. Still moments when Emily withdrew into herself, or Rachel wrestled with her past mistakes, but there was progress. Real progress. And with each small step, Caleb felt his purpose deepen. One morning, as Caleb sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in his hand, Emily came into the room. She was holding a small notebook in her hands, her brow furrowed in concentration. Caleb watched her for a moment, sensing that something was on her mind. She had been spending a lot of time writing in her journal lately, something she had started doing after one of her therapy sessions. It was part of her healing process, a way for her to put her feelings into words. "Caleb," Emily said, her voice soft, yet there was a certain strength to it. "Can I show you something?" Caleb nodded, setting his coffee aside. He could tell that whatever she had written in that notebook meant something important to her. Emily opened the notebook and handed it to him. As he looked down at the page, his eyes scanned the words she had written. "Sometimes, I feel like I'm living in two worlds. One is the one where everything is okay, where I laugh and play and feel safe. But the other one is dark and scary. It's the one where I still remember everything that happened. The fear, the hurt. I don't know how to make both worlds fit inside me. I don't know how to be both. But maybe I'm supposed to learn how." Caleb read the words again, feeling the weight of them sink deep into his chest. He could feel the raw emotion behind every sentence, every word that Emily had written. He had watched her struggle, but seeing it on paper made it even more real. She was battling with herself, trying to reconcile the girl she had been with the girl she was becoming. "Emily," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion, "you don't have to do this alone. You never have to do this alone. I'm here, and I always will be." Emily looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She bit her lip, as if holding back the words she wasn't sure how to say. Caleb reached out, gently placing his hand on hers. "It's okay to feel confused," he continued. "It's okay to have moments when you feel like you're torn between two worlds. Healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about learning to live with it, accepting that it's part of your story, but it doesn't define who you are." Emily nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She seemed to relax a little, her shoulders less tense. Caleb could see the flicker of hope in her eyes, the recognition that maybe, just maybe, she could move forward, without leaving everything behind. I think I'm starting to understand that, Emily said quietly. Maybe I don't need to forget. Maybe I just need to remember and still keep going. Caleb smiled, pride swelling in his chest. He had always known that Emily was strong, but hearing her voice that strength, hearing her claim it for herself, was a powerful moment. You're already doing it, Emily, he said softly. You're already on your way. The conversation shifted after that. Emily seemed lighter, her burden a little less heavy. But Caleb knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges. There would be moments when the dark parts of her past would resurface, when the fear would creep back in, but they would face it together, just as they always had. Later that day, as Caleb and Rachel sat down to talk, the topic of Emily came up. She's doing better, Rachel said, her voice filled with both relief and lingering concern. But I can see how hard it is for her to face everything. I wish I could take away the pain, Caleb. But I don't know how. Caleb reached across the table, placing a hand on hers. You don't have to take it away, Rachel. You just need to be there for her. And you are. Every day, you're showing her that you're not going anywhere. Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. I'll never stop trying, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Caleb gave her a reassuring smile. I know you won't. And neither will I. As the evening went on, Caleb found himself reflecting on everything that had happened, everything that was still to come. He had come into this situation as an outsider, a man trying to do the right thing. But in the end, he had become part of something so much bigger than himself. He had become part of their family. And no matter how long it took, no matter how difficult the journey was, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. They had each other. And that was all that mattered. As the months went by, Caleb continued to find himself navigating a world he hadn't expected. Every day, he grew more and more aware of just how deeply his life had been transformed by Emily, Luna, and Rachel. The walls he had built around himself for so long had begun to crumble. And in their place, he was finding a warmth he hadn't known he needed. Emily, still fragile but strong in her own way, was slowly but steadily finding her place in the world again. She was starting to feel like herself. The girl who could laugh freely, who could speak without fear, who could trust again. And with each passing day, Caleb saw her becoming more of the person she was meant to be. But it wasn't just Emily who had changed. Rachel, too, was evolving. The guilt that once consumed her was still present, but it no longer controlled her. She had come a long way, trying to make amends, working every day to be the mother Emily and Luna deserved. But there were still days when Rachel doubted herself, when she questioned if she could ever truly make up for her mistakes. Caleb could see the struggle in her eyes. And on those days, he reminded her of how far she had come. One evening, as they sat together, Rachel looked at Caleb, her voice soft and vulnerable. Do you think I'm doing enough? She asked, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Caleb knew this was a question that had been on her mind for a long time. Rachel, he said, his voice steady but full of care. You're doing more than enough. Every day, you're showing them that you love them, that you're there for them, and that's what matters. Rachel looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. I just want them to have a better life. I want to make sure they know that I'm here for them, no matter what. Caleb smiled warmly, reaching across the table to take her hand. They know, Rachel. They know you're here. And so do I. The words seemed to sink in. And for the first time in a long time, Rachel seemed to relax. A weight lifting from her shoulders. Caleb knew that there would always be moments of doubt, but he also knew that Rachel had come a long way, and she wasn't alone anymore. They all had each other now. Later that night, Caleb found himself lying awake in bed, his mind racing with everything that had happened. He thought about how far they had come, how much they had all grown. Emily was no longer the scared, withdrawn girl she had been when he first met her. She was finding her voice, finding her place in the world again. Luna was laughing, playing, and growing up in a way that Caleb had never thought possible for a child who had been through so much. And Rachel, though still working through her past, was becoming the mother they all needed her to be. For the first time in years, Caleb felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was enough. In the months that followed, Caleb found himself even more deeply embedded in the lives of Emily, Luna, and Rachel. He wasn't just their protector anymore. He was their family. They had all healed together. But the work was never truly done. Every day was a new opportunity to grow, to strengthen their bond, to face whatever came next. There were still tough days, days when the weight of the past felt overwhelming, days when Emily would retreat into herself, days when Rachel would question if she was doing enough. But on those days, Caleb was there, reminding them of how far they had come and how much further they could go. One day, as they all sat together in the living room, Emily turned to Caleb, her face serious but hopeful. "Caleb," she said quietly, "I think I'm ready to go back to school. I think I'm ready to try again." Caleb felt a rush of pride and admiration for the young girl who had overcome so much. "I think that's a great idea," he said with a smile. "You've come so far, Emily. You're stronger than you know." Emily smiled back at him, and for the first time, Caleb saw a spark of confidence in her that had been missing for so long. It wasn't just about going back to school. It was about her taking control of her life again, about reclaiming her future. As the days went on, Emily started school again. And while it wasn't always easy, she pushed through, showing the strength Caleb had always known was there. Luna continued to grow and thrive, and Rachel continued to fight for the family she was trying so hard to build. Caleb watched all of them, feeling a deep sense of pride in how far they had come. They had faced so much, but they had done it together. They had found healing, found strength, and most importantly, found each other. It wasn't always going to be easy. There would be days when the past resurfaced, days when the pain felt too much to bear. But Caleb knew that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. He wasn't just a man who had stepped in to help. He was a part of their family now. And no matter what the future held, they would face it together. As time passed, Caleb found himself reflecting on the journey he had taken with Emily, Luna, and Rachel. The challenges had been many, but so had the victories. Each day, they built a new foundation, one made of love, trust, and resilience. What started as a rescue mission to help two lost girls had turned into something much deeper, something that Caleb had never expected. A family. He had come into this journey not knowing what the future held. But now, he couldn't imagine his life without them. Emily had grown into a young woman who had found strength in her own voice, who had learned to embrace both the darkness and light of her past. Luna, who had been so small and fragile, was now a vibrant little girl with a contagious laugh that filled the house. Rachel, though still working through her past mistakes, had become the mother she had always wanted to be. She was present, she was loving, and she was determined to give her daughters a future that was full of possibility. The road wasn't always smooth, and it still wasn't perfect, but that was the reality of healing. Some days, Emily would struggle with her memories, retreating into herself, but each time, she would find her way back. Rachel would have moments of doubt, wondering if she had done enough, but Caleb always reminded her of how far they had come. And Luna, she was the light, the reminder of what it meant to be free from the weight of the past, to be a child with a bright future ahead of her. It was late one evening when Caleb found himself standing in the living room, looking out the window at the city below. The world was still out there, moving at its usual fast pace. But Caleb had found a new kind of peace, one that didn't come from business deals or success. It came from being there for the people he loved, from watching them grow, from knowing that his presence in their lives mattered. He turned around as he heard footsteps behind him. It was Emily, standing at the doorway, looking at him with a calm, thoughtful expression. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. Caleb smiled, motioning for her to sit down. "Of course, Emily. What's on your mind?" She sat down next to him, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice steady, "about everything. About the past, and about how far we've come." Caleb nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I've realized something," she said, her eyes meeting his. "I'm not just the girl who was hurt. I'm not just the girl who lost everything. I'm the girl who found a new life. I'm the girl who found family." Caleb's heart swelled with emotion. He had always known Emily was strong, but hearing her say those words, hearing her own acceptance of her journey, filled him with pride. "You are that girl, Emily," he said softly. "And you're so much more than that. You're becoming the person you were always meant to be. And it's been a privilege to watch you grow." Emily smiled. A real smile. One that came from a place of understanding and peace. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said, her voice full of determination. "I know who I am, and I know that I have the people I love around me." Caleb reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You always will, Emily. No matter what, we'll always be here for you." The words hung in the air between them. A promise, a bond that had been forged through every challenge, every tear, every moment of joy. Later that night, Caleb sat with Rachel, watching as the girls prepared for bed. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that, despite all the odds, they had made it through. "You did it, Rachel," Caleb said softly. "You've given them a home, a place to heal." Rachel looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We did it, Caleb," she said. "Together, we did it." They both watched the girls, who were now safe, happy, and full of promise. Caleb knew the future wasn't guaranteed, that life would continue to bring challenges, but in that moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. They had come so far, and they were a family, a real family. And that, Caleb realized, was all that truly mattered.